Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for having me here. I get so much grief about this picture, it's unbelievable. Somebody in my MBA class put a ferret in my hands, and and that got 6,000 likes on LinkedIn. Oops, we're missing. Oh yeah. So when it comes to my age at this point, what I've noticed is that it's kind of there's a lot of popularity around having a midlife crisis, right? And we see the likes of Gino DeCampo with his bandana in the last few weeks, right? What's going on with that? We've seen my own namesake, Aunt McPartlin, he's had his troubles, right? And my wife has come out as a crafter. And her plan now is to craft the bejesus out of Christmas. And naturally, we're all pretty worried about that. Damn you, Kirsty Alsop. And myself, I've developed my own slight problem, and it's guitars. And it's not surprising, right? They're so shiny, all that polished wood, the chrome Bigsby tailpiece, the humbuckers, the rosewood with the mother of pearl inlay. Oh, just fantastic, right? And I know what you're thinking, right? Sweet axe, bro. So look, I've got it bad, right? But not as bad as this guy. Anybody know who this is? It's a guy called Joe Bonamassa. And he's a tremendous guitar player, and he's got a ridiculous guitar collection, obviously, right? He's got a Gibson Les Paul for every day of the week. He's got one for after Sunday dinner. And so, when I looked at this picture, it was interesting because when I speak to a lot of clients about their sales technology, it kind of reminds me of this picture a little bit. And there's different varying degrees of it, but I met with a client last week who, believe it or not, has 66 CRM systems. You think you got problems? You ain't got no. So they're right up here with Joe, right? They've got a CRM for every day of the week. And while that's obviously a kind of extreme scenario, pretty much all of the customers that I speak to, who we talk to about sales technology, have sales technology that they're not deriving the required or the expected return on investment. They've got sales technology where there's a level of duplication going on. And they have all got that sales technology that they only take out on special occasions, right? And so the question for us today is really, how do we, and this is where we spend a lot of time with clients, think about not just the technology, but the processes that we put around the management, the governance of sales technology, right? How we define the requirements for our sales tech, how we think about the implementation, the adoption, and that ongoing management of our sales technology stack. How do we continue to develop the roadmap of our technology so that our sales tech grows with the company? And that's really what we're going to focus a little bit on today. So if you think about it, we've got these, and we've had some talk about that already in terms of the types of sales technologies. I'm not going to go into each one of these. That's not my plan. I think you'll hear plenty about these today. What I am going to focus in on is some very specific sales roles. And I think when it comes to sales tech, obviously people purchase sales tech for a lot of different reasons, but probably at the top of that list is productivity. And we spend a lot of time talking with customers around their sales productivity. What is it? What does that baseline look like? Where are sellers spending their time today? And we developed this framework, it's called the Relative Productivity Framework, to try and help clients categorize where their sellers spend their time. And so what we do with clients is we run with them a sales activity study to really benchmark and baseline what that productivity looks like in their organization. And we do it in terms of 4 categories. On the bottom here, you have the internal versus direct engagement, and then you have what we might call non-core versus core activities. And obviously, from a sales perspective, we're trying to maximize the time our reps spend in the top right-hand corner, right? Too often, they're getting caught up in the non-value-added activities, right? We know there's time that they spend preparing for sales engagement, right? Doing research on clients, creating proposals, creating decks, right? Decks, oh, decks, I love decks. And then there's obviously time that reps end up spending servicing clients. And so the question is, what can we do to streamline these activities? Because if we aggregate the data that we've collected from our various sales activity studies, and if we look at 2018 alone, we ran a series of sales activity studies that covered 10,000 salespeople. And what we were able to aggregate from that data is, on average, in the working week, and let's assume salespeople work around 53 hours a week on average, believe it or not, they're only spending 13.3 hours of that time directly engaging with clients, right? So productivity should be a major concern. And certainly from a sales operations perspective, it should be the primary concern of the sales operations team. How do we give more time back to sellers so that they can directly engage with clients? And then to a certain extent, it's sales enablement's role then, once we give back that time, to make sure that they're able to then have really effective conversations when they're having that moment of truth in front of customers. So as I said, this was a pretty sizable activity study that we do across our client base. A pretty good mix of company types, right, in terms of size. Not all startups are high growth, but a mix of those types of companies and much larger organizations, and also industry types, although obviously you can see pretty heavy emphasis on information technology. And this is how it breaks down in terms of sales roles, right? So you see those 4 quadrants represented here in the bar charts, and this is really the one that we're interested in here, right? That direct engagement time. And you can see it varies by sales role, it varies by motion in terms of outbound versus inbound. But clearly, for organizations to drive productivity, they have to understand what their baseline looks like. How does it compare to everybody else's in that same relevant category? And what are we going to do then to actually drive improvements? So what levers can we pull to drive productivity in the organization? And there's a number of them. Obviously, we can push more stuff through, right, in terms of volume. So how much have we got at each stage in that demand waterfall, however that looks, right? And we obviously define that in certain ways, and companies will define it in other ways as well. In terms of leads, opportunities, how can we improve the conversion rate, right, through the waterfall and from end to end? How can we increase the actual deal sizes, right? How do we improve the cycle time? How do we get things through that funnel faster? And then how do we give our reps the ability to, as we said, when we give them that more time, that they're really effective in those moments of truth? So we're going to look at 3 specific role profiles and how sales technology can really help drive productivity for those different roles. So from business development, they're focused on prospecting, qualifying leads, nurturing leads. For opportunity and account executive and account managers, they have an opportunity now. They're qualifying those opportunities. They're working them through to close. And then sales managers, they're obviously trying to drive the performance of their sales teams, to coach those people. And we want to make sure that they have as much time that they're spending not only helping those guys sales, but providing coaching to them to help their development. So if we think about the business development process, we're obviously, we're out there engaging with prospects, and we're doing that through a number of different motions, through teleprospecting, outbound, and then there's marketing programs that are driving inbound activity, and that's happening across a number of different channels: calls, emails, chat, social content, whatever it might be. But ultimately, the goal is to drive an appointment, and then obviously we want to have that conversation. We want the prospect to attend, and hopefully then be able to convert that through to an opportunity that our AEs will then probably work, depending on how your organization is structured. So, and obviously where they aren't, then nurture that back into a queue so that when they are ready, we can move forward. So where are the opportunities for acceleration or productivity enhancement in this process? So if we think about it from the starting point, obviously in terms of the data that we provide to our BDRs, our DDRs, the accuracy of our profile information, the contact information, the completeness of it, right? How up to date it is. To some of the points that we spoke about earlier on in terms of the engagements that happen throughout that cycle. How are we capturing that information? How are we sharing it with the BDRs in terms of what people have been involved, who's been part of the buying group, what type of engagements have they had? And so there's a range of technologies, and we just heard about some of those, right, in terms of call automation. Cadence management is obviously an important area in terms of driving productivity, driving effectiveness of those activities, making it easier for BDRs to track their activity. We're seeing the increasing use of chatbots, companies like Drift and so on. The ability to analyze that engagement end to end. What does it mean for us in terms of how we engage with clients, when, what type of content we share, that type of thing. From an actual selling perspective, we want to have technology that guides our sellers through the process, right? That gives them the next best step to follow. We want to make sure it's simple and straightforward to set up appointments. We want to be able to analyze conversations that we're having throughout that process, understand where we can make improvements, how can we ensure that that moment of truth is as effective as possible, and then overall we need to be able to analyze performance and optimize that workflow in terms of lead routing and et cetera. So this is kind of an index of that. I'm not going to go through all of these, but to focus on the top one here in terms of calling, obviously we're looking to try and drive automation here, and things like dialers have been around for quite some time, click to call and so on, and we're seeing certainly a huge emphasis now on call recording, transcription, conversation analysis. And what's interesting is that really we're seeing, whereas traditionally a lot of these things were individually sold as individual products, they've now become a victim of the S-curve, right? So they're now a feature in somebody else's product. And so you see platforms like SalesLoft, for example, are integrating some of these different technologies together into one platform. They're combining it with things like analytics and automation to allow these sales teams to work in one environment, right? They're not switching between different systems, and that's really important from a productivity perspective. It's also really important from a sales operations and sales management perspective in terms of just the more efficient management of your sales tech stack. Moving on to the next role in terms of AEs and AMs and the opportunity management process. So the goal of a sales process should be to try and match to how our buyers buy, right? We want to make sure we're in sync with how they actually work their way through the decision cycle, right? There's got to be alignment there. And obviously there's a range of activities that we do throughout that process. We're engaging, we're qualifying, we're developing, we're generating proposals, whatever it may be in terms of configure, quote, and so on. We're spending a lot of time accessing, trying to find, prepare content. You'll hear more from Seismic later on, I'm sure about that. We're also they're looking to develop their own competencies to ensure that they get a better conversion through this process. And a key part of it obviously is forecasting and predicting where their book of business is going to end up. So again, where are those opportunities for acceleration and productivity improvement? I mean, activity capture, again, here is a big one, right? We know that field sales reps, for example, don't like filling in stuff in CRM systems, right? So many companies now are just taking that out of their hands, right? They're just making that something that they don't have to do because they don't do it well, right? And that has big impacts for the rest of the organization in terms of reporting, in terms of data accuracy, suggesting content, scoring opportunities. So how can we give them guidance as to what are the right opportunities to be focused on? Because salespeople have happy ears, we know that, right? They don't often or don't always need to know when to give up on opportunities. And so giving them the data that can guide them as to what ones to really focus on is important. We also want to be able to give them some insight in terms of what's going on at the accounts that they're going after, right? What type of engagement has gone on? What type of changes have happened in that organization? What are those trigger events that they need to maybe use as a spur for engagement? And then obviously, as with our previous scenario, giving them those next best steps to follow is becoming increasingly important. And that needs to be far more dynamic than it's been in the past, right? It's not the days of everybody going off-site and defining your sales process, and then that's kind of some sort of static process that you have in place for 3 years and then you revisit it again. Those days are kind of over, right? We've got to figure out how can we create something that really adjusts based on what's happening in that interaction. We want to be able to recommend product options and so on, right, as we go through that process. A big part of it, obviously, as well, is that salespeople want to understand what it's going to mean to their pockets, right? So technology that stops them from having to spend lots of time with their Excel calculators, figuring out how much money they're going to make each month. We'll hear a little bit more about that, I'm sure, later on as well. So again, just indexing this here, we see technology here that really focuses on how do we get that time saved back to sellers in terms of filling in their CRM data. How do we make sure that that data is accurate, it's robust? And then there's technologies around forecasting and pipeline management, technologies like Clary that you'll see more of today, that take that information, that automatically captured data, and use it to create algorithms in terms of where the book of business is likely to end up in terms of forecasting models and so on. So the last scenario is the sales manager, right? And again, a similar model here in terms of how we think about sales manager productivity. And again, what we're trying to do is give them more time in this top right corner, right? More time to spend supporting deal strategy, supporting reps in the field, coaching, right? And so if we think about what they do in these different boxes, they're spending a lot of time across these different areas. For example, internal reporting, right? They're spending a lot of time in Excel trying to figure out what performance was. And that's not value time spent. It's time that they have to spend because they have to provide some justification of what they've been doing for the organization in terms of senior leadership, the various cadences that they have. But we can certainly, there's technology available that can make that a lot easier for them, right? From the top left-hand corner in terms of streamlining, so these are the activities that are really essential for the ongoing management, effective management of a sales team. But we need to be able to streamline it. We need to make that much more efficient, much more effective. So when you think about forecasting, pipeline management, sales planning and strategy, there's a lot of technology out there that really focuses on making that process far more robust, far more efficient. And you'll hear about some of those today. In terms of the bottom right hand, we've got things that are really, we know sales managers are spending a lot of time on those today, but we want them spending less time on them. We want that to start to think about how would we leverage that and start to delegate some of that activity. A good example of it is around quota setting and allocation. Absolutely, we want sales managers involved in that process, but we don't want them creating their own Excel spreadsheets, coming up with God knows what, right? And also, we don't want them spending 3-4 months in a planning loop while they're not out there supporting engagement, supporting individual reps. That's not valuable for the organization overall, right? So how can we do that? How can we push the burden around the sales planning effort from the individual sales managers to sales operations, right? How can we give sales ops the tools so that they can manage that process more effectively, and that the sales manager then becomes more of a validator, more of an input, more review focus in terms of sales planning? And then lastly, how do we, with all of the calling that's going on in the sales environment, how can we give the sales managers insight into what those engagements are like, the quality of those engagements? How can we give them the opportunity to review all of the different calls that are going on from different reps? And if you're thinking about 100 calls being made a day by individual reps, how's a manager keeping track of that, right? So there's the tools that you'll see and hear more about today. Give them the opportunity to sample their way through conversations, to be able to score those, to be able to guide reps in terms of where they're going with their conversations. Now, I'm sure you're going to see a couple of different versions of the sales tech stack today, and this is actually probably not just a sales tech stack, it's a revenue ops or revenue engine tech stack. And really the focus here is not so much on what's in here, but again, to my point earlier on, how we manage this stuff. So yes, there are, we need to think about how all of this technology integrates end to end, right? From demand management, opportunity management into the actual customer life cycle, right? And so not just this piece in the middle. We have to think about it end to end. And then obviously there are different layers in your tech stack. There's the kind of core layer in terms of CRM, MAP, in terms of data management, in terms of analytics. And then obviously what you add on top in terms of the application layer depends on your maturity as an organization, the type of resources you have, the investments that you have. And so companies will add to that as they progress and mature. But as I said, the point really is not so much what's in there, it's around how you manage it. So how are you managing the integration end to end? Who owns that in the organization? That's a big problem that I see talking with clients over and over. Are there shared objectives in terms of where the roadmap is for our technology, and who governs it, right? Who's managing that change management? Who's driving adoption within the organization? Who's stepping up to show the return on investment from all of this technology? And so this is something that we spend a lot of time with clients around, putting some structure around that process, in terms of auditing what they have, identifying gaps, building the business case, and then driving that governance process. And what we ultimately want to end up with is not Joe's, 65 guitars. What we want is a really efficient, a really effective gigging rig, if you like, that allows our sales reps to perform at its best. Thanks.